Welcome to The New Norm. I'm Steve Norman. Thanks so much for joining me. Today I want to look at a passage of Scripture that many of you probably know, but is striking me in a new way recently. It's about the quest to find something that has been lost, something that matters, something precious, something insanely valuable, something worth pursuing, that the seeker stops at nothing until it's reclaimed and refound. When I was in elementary school, my father gave me a wallet. So I'm dating myself. This was back in the 80s. And this wallet was camouflage and it was Velcro. And I still find it intriguing that I was so excited about the wallet because I didn't have any money to put in it. But long story short, our family was living in suburban Chicago at that time. And on occasion, we would go into the city for outings or errands or special events. And after one such visit to the city, I came home that night, and as I was getting ready to go to bed, I realized to my horror that my wallet was missing. And I found out the next morning that my dad, because he loves me and cares about the things I care about, had gone back into the city to retrace our steps and look for the lost wallet. And to this day, I have this image in my head, a silhouette of my father, my PhD educated father, the dad who helped NASA develop the rocket program that put Americans on the moon. That dad hunched over municipal garbage cans, digging through them to find a Velcro wallet that was probably worth $3. And it still warms me to this day to think about my dad going on that errand on that behalf because something that was precious to me, even though it would not have had any value to anybody else, had gone missing. So with that in mind, let's look at the scriptures. This is Luke chapter 15. It says, "Now the tax collectors and sinners were all gathering around to hear Jesus. But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law muttered, 'This man welcomes sinners and eats with them.'" So just put a pin in that for a moment. The context, the audience for this parable is something I want you to keep in mind. Both the tax collectors in one corner and the sinners, the tax collectors and the sinners in one corner, and the Pharisees and the teachers of the law in the others. Then Jesus told them this parable. "Suppose one of you has 100 sheep and loses one of them. Doesn't he leave the 99 in the open country and go after the lost sheep until he finds it? And when he finds it, he joyfully puts it on his shoulders and goes home. Then he calls his friends and neighbors together and says, 'Rejoice with me, I found my lost sheep.' I tell you, in the same way, there will be more rejoicing in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who do not need to repent." In my early 20s, I did a brief stint in retail at our local mall, and I learned this term called shrink. Shrink is when a merchant loses inventory. Either it gets lost by clumsy employees or it's stolen. And I'll need to double check the math on this, but I think somebody once said that if your level of shrink could be in the single digits, like between 5 and 10%, you'd be in a good space. And when I think about the shepherd, his shrink rate when he loses his one sheep is 1%. You can imagine a lot of merchants saying, "Hey, 1% isn't all that bad. We've still got 99% of what we started with, and we don't like losing sheep, and we try not to make it a regular practice, but the business will survive if we're down 1%. I don't know if you've gone sheep buying lately, but I checked yesterday, and apparently the average rate for a livestock sheep is about $450. And if I lost $450, I would turn over cushions in my house and look underneath my car seat to find it, even if there was still 99 times $450 lying around. So we have the stage is set. Jesus is saying this item is of great value to the shepherd, and he'll stop at nothing until he gets it back. So a sheep has gone missing. Who's out looking? The shepherd is. And then we have another version of the story. Or suppose a woman has 10 silver coins and loses one. Doesn't she light a lamp, sweep the house, and search carefully until she finds it? And when she finds it, she calls her friends and neighbors together and says, 'Rejoice with me, I found my lost coin.' In the same way, I tell you, there is rejoicing in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents." Now, some scholars think that this woman, she had these coins, and the coins weren't like loose change. The coins were represented her entire net worth at that stage in her life. So some people think that the 10 coins represented a dowry. Other people think that the 10 coins represented all the money that she had left after her husband passed. So if she is in fact a widow and there is no Social Security, then the 10 coins represent all that she has to live on for the rest of her days. And if she were to lose 10% of those, think of math that's going on in her own head. It's, I can live for 1 less year, or I've got 2 less years or 3 less years to get by given this loss. And so she turns her house completely upside down. And when she finds the coin, she gathers everybody together and says, hey, come rejoice with me. I've lost something of value, but I found it again. Everything's going to be all right. So when the widow loses a coin, people say, who's out there looking? Well, the widow is. Now, look at how the stakes are increasing as the passage continues. The shepherd is losing 1% of his flock. The woman is losing 10% of her savings. So the net value keeps increasing. And then we get to a family that has 2 sons. And if you're a parent, you don't need me to tell you that there's not a dollar amount that you could put on the head of any one of your children. They are precious and invaluable. So Jesus continued, there was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, Father, give me my share of the estate. So he divided his property between them. And not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in that whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. And he longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. Just imagine how horrifying that would have been for Jesus' audience, who didn't eat pigs at all. That things have gotten so badly for this one son who came from a highly esteemed family in the community, that things are so bad that not only is he in the presence of animals that are unclean, he wants to eat the food that they're eating. Things have truly spiraled out of control. And when he came to his senses, he said, how many of my father's hired servants have food to spare? And yet here I am starving to death. I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants. So he got up and went to his father. And if you know the rest of the story, you know that he makes this long trek home. His father welcomes him with open arms. His father calls for the servants to throw a massive party. And the one person who's not excited about the younger brother's return is the older brother, who resents the fact that his dad is welcoming him back so readily, even after all of the shame and grief and heartache that he has caused the family. And the father has to have a heart-to-heart with the older brother to say, hey, I think you're missing the point. And Jesus is trying to relate to his audience that if the younger brother's sin is one of open rebellion, then the older brother's sin is one of closeted self-righteousness. They are both toxic and both dangerous in their own ways. So when you do kind of a compare and contrast, when you look at the 3 stories in sequence, I want to ask this question: what's missing? See, in the first story, the shepherd goes looking for what was lost. And in the second story, the woman goes looking for what was lost. And in the third story, nobody goes looking for the younger brother. And one writer and scholar that I read recently said, he argued that in ancient Near Eastern culture, it would have been the responsibility of the older brother to go out and search the highways and byways, the open fields and the dark alleys, trying to find his wayward brother and bring him back home. When I was in elementary school, I got into some sort of tiff with my mom. I do not even remember what it was, but I was so fed up, I said, that's it. I can't afford to live under this roof and under this oppressive regime any longer. So I told my mom that my time there had ended and that I was running away. And my mom very graciously and very wisely helped drag a suitcase down from the attic and helped me pack it with all the things that I might need to start my new adventure. And she was also gracious enough to pack me a peanut butter and jelly sandwich in case I got hungry along the way. But then she also had the wisdom to send my older brother out with me. So I think I was 8 or 9. My brother would have been 15 or 16. And we got a couple blocks away in the December snow in a Chicago winter. And I remember him asking me, hey, so where are you going to spend your first night on your own? And I remember telling him, "Why? I think I'll probably just stay at Eric Johnson's house." And he said, "Does Eric's mom know that you're coming? It's a school night. Kids tend not to have sleepovers on school nights." And I said, "No." And then I was really embarrassed that I hadn't thought this all the way through. And I said, "I'll probably just sleep here on the street corner." And my brother said, "Well, it's illegal to sleep out in the open in Western Springs. I don't know if that's part of the city code or not, but it spooked me enough that I followed my brother home. My time on my own lasted for all of about 17 minutes. What I love in that story is that when I left, I didn't leave alone. I had a brother who was walking with me, or maybe a little bit behind me, to make sure that my welfare and my safety were still intact. And the one thing that is missing in this story is an older brother who went out looking. The Bible has a lot of interesting stories about brothers. One of the most horrifying ones is at the very beginning of the story, in the book of Genesis, where Cain is so frustrated with his younger brother Abel. He's so jealous of him and his standing with God that he just up and murders him. And later God says, "Hey, where's your brother?" And Cain goes, I don't know. And then Cain asks this question. He goes, "Am I my brother's keeper? Like, am I really responsible for him?" And the implied answer from God is, "Yes, you are." And Cain commits direct violence towards Abel. But in this story, what Jesus is saying is that the older brother is committing an indirect violence against the younger brother by not valuing him enough to pursue him, to hunt him down, to reclaim him, and to bring him home. And what Jesus is saying, not so subtly at all, to the Pharisees is, you're the older brother. And these people who are sitting in the same circle as you, these tax collectors, these sinners on the other side of the room, they're the younger brother, and they're trying to make their way back. And you are stiff-arming them. You're blocking them. You're prohibiting them from coming close to the person of God and the beauty of the gospel. And Jesus is saying, that's not right. You've completely lost the heart of the Father. And there should be rejoicing when sinners, in quotes, or tax collectors, people who you believe have broken the code, broken faith with God, broken faith with the covenant, broken faith with the community, when they inch their way back, it's not a time for judgment, and it's not a time of shaming. It should be a time of jubilant celebration, nothing less and nothing else. I remember hearing this passage when I worked for a church that had a high value on evangelism. I remember preaching this passage at that same church that had a high value on evangelism. And when we talked about the one, we always meant somebody who wasn't yet a follower of Jesus, somebody who hadn't heard the message. So we were trying to say, like, hey, we expand the family by pursuing the one. But when I come back and I read this story in context, Jesus wasn't telling the Pharisees to go convert Gentiles to Judaism. He was telling them to run out to their fellow Jews who had walked away, whether it had been through open rebellion or hurt or cynicism or disillusionment, and bring them back. So this wasn't a business trying to get new clients. It was a business trying to reclaim former disgruntled clients that had quit the business and walked away. So this isn't a passage about evangelism per se. It's a passage about reconciliation, restoration, reclamation. And I think many times, especially in this kind of post-COVID era that we're in, a lot of us could say, like, oh, I remember we used to see so-and-so at church, but we don't see them anymore. And sometimes the posture is one of kind of curious gossip and not one of legitimate concern. And sometimes what I observe is this sense of, well, they know where we live. They've got the church address. They've been here before. And if and when they're ready, they will find their way back. And if they're not, well, then don't let the door hit you. We're doing just fine without you. And that posture, while it might be kind of normal for people who like to create in-groups, isn't healthy, and it sure isn't the ethos, not the heartbeat, not the pulse that Jesus celebrates, invites us to, calls us towards in Luke chapter 15. So if you're listening to this today and you are a younger brother, you've walked away, You've burned some bridges. You've sown your wild oats and broken all of the rules and done all of the things that you knew you weren't supposed to do. Know this. There's still time for you to come home. And today is a great day to take a step in that direction. But also know this. If you're an older brother and you find yourself leaning towards hard-heartedness and judgment and condemnation, today's a good day for you to repent of that too. And for you to say, God, I'm sorry. My heart does not reflect your heart. I have not been chasing down the things that matter to you in the way that you do and in the way that you model in this passage. Will you have mercy on me? Will you take a heart of stone and turn it into a heart of flesh? Will you do a reset on me and the way that I think about people who aren't living the way that I like to think that I do? And will you give me the ability to be the kind of person that when somebody asks, hey, who's out there looking for that lost sheep? Who's out there looking for that lost coin? Who's out there looking for the lost brother? You could say confidently and joyfully, I am. I am. Thanks so much for listening. This is The New Norm. We'll catch you next time.